I was sitting at my desk, half focused on the report I was supposed to finish, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alex, my boss. My pulse quickened, but I tried to keep my cool. We've been texting a lot lately, mostly work stuff, but sometimes he'd slip in a joke or something a bit personal. I unlocked my phone, expecting a question about the upcoming presentation, but what I saw made my breath hitch. "Why don't you send me a little preview of what I'm missing? Maybe you're nude?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Was he serious? I glanced around the office, making sure no one noticed my sudden panic. I could feel the heat rising to my face, but I couldn't look away from the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. "Jake, is he really suggesting what I think he is?" I typed back, my hands trembling slightly. "Jake, Alex, are you drunk?" I hit send, trying to play it cool, but my mind was spinning. This wasn't just flirting, this was crossing a line, a big one. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. "Alex, not drunk. Just curious. Unless you're too shy?" I swallowed hard. Was this really happening? I'd admired Alex from afar since I started at Apex Technologies 6 months ago. He's everything you'd expect from a CEO, confident, sharp, and undeniably attractive. But I never thought he'd notice me, let alone this. My fingers moved almost on their own as I typed a response, my breath catching in my throat. "Jake, maybe I'm not the shy one here. How about a drink first?" I pressed send, my heart pounding. What was I doing? The thrill of the moment was intoxicating, but I knew this could end badly, really badly. Before I could second-guess myself, my phone buzzed again. "Alex, Friday night. You and me. I'll show you who's shy." My stomach flipped as I read his reply. This was it, no turning back now. I stared at the screen, my mind racing with possibilities, and I couldn't help but smile. This was about to get interesting. Friday night arrived faster than I expected, and I found myself standing outside an upscale bar downtown, nerves bubbling under my skin. I checked my reflection in the window, adjusting my collar for what felt like the 100th time. Why was I so nervous? It's just drinks, I told myself, but deep down I knew it wasn't just drinks. The door swung open, and there he was, Alex, looking every bit the successful CEO. His dark eyes locked onto mine, a small, confident smile playing on his lips. He walked over, his presence magnetic. "Jake," he greeted me, his voice smooth, almost too casual. "Glad you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, trying to sound equally relaxed, but I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. He held the door open for me, a gentlemanly gesture that only added to my nerves. As we walked in, the warmth of the bar contrasted sharply with the cool night outside. It was intimate, dimly lit, perfect for a private conversation or whatever this was turning into. We found a table in the corner, away from prying eyes. As soon as we sat down, Alex ordered us drinks, taking charge as usual. I tried to relax, reminding myself to keep things professional, but the way he looked at me told me this was anything but business. So he started, leaning back in his chair. "Have you been thinking about my offer?" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I swallowed, trying to figure out the right response. "You mean the one about showing you what you're missing?" Alex chuckled, low and rich. "That's the one." The drinks arrived, giving me a moment to collect myself. I took a sip, hoping it would calm my nerves. "I thought about it," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I'm still not sure if you're serious." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm very serious, Jake, but I'm not going to push you into anything. This is your call." His words were careful, but there was an edge to them, a challenge that made my pulse quicken. I could feel the tension between us, thick and electric. The ball was in my court, and we both knew it. I set my glass down, the decision forming in my mind. Then let's see where the night takes us. His smile widened, his eyes gleaming with something that sent a shiver down my spine. I liked the sound of that. For the next hour we talked about work, life, anything that wasn't what we were both thinking about. But the tension never left, it only grew stronger, a silent agreement hanging between us. Every glance, every brush of his hand against mine was charged with unspoken desire. As the night wore on, the bar began to empty, and Alex leaned in closer, his voice low. "Let's get out of here." It wasn't a question. I nodded, my heart racing as I stood up. The reality of what was happening started to sink in, but there was no hesitation, no second guessing. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. We walked side by side, the silence between us thick with anticipation. When we reached his car, Alex turned to me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I've been wanting to do this since the moment I saw you tonight." Before I could respond, he stepped closer, his hand cupping the back of my neck as he pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was intense, all the tension from the evening finally spilling over. I kissed him back, losing myself in the moment, in the thrill of it all. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. Alex's hand still lingered on my neck, his thumb brushing my skin. "Come back to my place." It wasn't a request, but I didn't need convincing. "Lead the way." The ride to Alex's place was charged with a quiet tension. We didn't say much, but the air between us was thick with what was about to happen. I stared out the window, trying to calm the storm of nerves and excitement swirling inside me. The city lights blurred as we sped through the streets, the silence only broken by the occasional hum of the engine. When we pulled up to his building, a sleek, modern high-rise, I felt a surge of anticipation. Alex parked, and without a word, we stepped out into the quiet night. He led the way, his hand lightly brushing against mine, as we walked toward the entrance. Inside, the elevator ride felt like it lasted forever, each second stretching as the anticipation built. I could feel Alex's gaze on me, but I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the soft ding of the elevator as it ascended. When the doors finally slid open, he motioned for me to follow him down the hall. His apartment was exactly what I'd imagined: spacious, elegant, and impersonal, like something out of a magazine. But there was no time to take it all in, because the moment the door clicked shut behind us, Alex turned to me, his eyes dark with intent. "This isn't just a casual thing for me, Jake," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need you to know that." His words caught me off guard, but before I could process them, he was in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, pulling me closer. His lips found mine again, and just like outside the bar, the kiss was intense, demanding, like he'd been holding back all night. I kissed him back with equal hunger, the last of my reservations melting away as he guided me toward the living room. We stumbled slightly, bumping into the edge of a sleek leather couch, but neither of us cared. My hands fumbled at his shirt, desperate to feel the warmth of his skin beneath the fabric. Alex pulled back just enough to peel his shirt off, tossing it aside carelessly. I stared at him, taking in the hard lines of his chest, the way his muscles tensed under my gaze. He reached for me, pulling my shirt over my head before our lips collided again. We made our way to the couch, falling onto it in a tangle of limbs. His hands were everywhere, exploring, claiming, leaving no part of me untouched. I responded in kind, driven by a need I didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only Alex and the fire he ignited in me. The way he touched me, kissed me, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced: intense, raw, consuming. Every thought, every worry melted away, leaving only the sensation of his body against mine, the heat of his breath on my skin. At some point he paused, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "Are you sure about this?" I was breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes," I replied, and I meant it. There was no going back now. I wanted this, wanted him. That was all the encouragement he needed. The rest of the night was a blur of passion and intensity, the boundaries between us disappearing completely. We moved together in perfect rhythm, each touch, each kiss driving us closer to the edge. When it was over, we lay there, tangled in each other, the silence heavy but comfortable. I stared up at the ceiling, my mind spinning with what had just happened. Alex's hand rested on my chest, his touch now gentle, almost tender. "This isn't just a fling, Jake," he murmured, his voice softer now. "I don't want it to be." I turned to look at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. It scared me, the intensity of it all, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. I nodded slowly, words failing me. He smiled, a small, satisfied smile, before he leaned in to kiss me again, this time softer, slower, as if sealing a promise. I kissed him back, a mix of emotions swirling inside me: fear, excitement, and something else I wasn't ready to name yet. We drifted off to sleep like that, tangled together on the couch, the world outside forgotten. I woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the blinds, my body still tangled with Alex's on the couch. For a moment I just lay there, trying to piece together the events of the night before. My muscles ached pleasantly, a reminder of everything that had happened, and I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anxiety settling in my chest. Alex stirred beside me, his arm tightening around my waist as he pulled me closer. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. The sound of it sent a shiver down my spine. "Morning," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. I wasn't sure what to expect: awkwardness, regret, something else entirely, but all I felt was a weird calm, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look at me. His hair was tousled, and there was a softness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "How are you feeling?" The question was simple, but it carried weight. I hesitated, not wanting to overthink things. "I'm good," I said, meeting his gaze. "Better than good, actually." His lips curved into a small smile, one that made my heart skip a beat. "Me too," he said. And then, after a pause, "Last night wasn't just a one-time thing for me, Jake. I want you to know that." There it was again, that seriousness, that intensity. It should have scared me, but instead it felt reassuring, like he was giving me something solid to hold on to. I nodded slowly. I didn't think it was. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath and leaned in to kiss me softly. It wasn't like the night before. This kiss was different, gentler, like we were on the same page now. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my skin. "I'm glad," he whispered, and for a moment, everything felt perfect, like we were in our own little bubble where nothing else mattered. But reality was already creeping back in. The sunlight streaming through the window was a harsh reminder that we were no longer in the dark, that the world outside hadn't disappeared. I shifted slightly, breaking the contact, and Alex noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern flashing in his eyes. I shook my head, trying to put my thoughts into words. "It's just, we've crossed a line, and it's not like we can just pretend nothing's changed when we go back to work." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sat up. "I know, but we don't have to figure everything out right now. We'll take it one step at a time." His calmness was comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing in my chest. "What if someone finds out?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me since last night. He looked at me seriously. "We'll be careful. No one needs to know unless we want them to. And if it ever becomes a problem, we'll deal with it together." His confidence was unwavering, and I wanted to believe him, but doubt still lingered. "I just don't want to mess things up at work, or between us." "You won't," he said firmly, taking my hand. "We won't. We'll figure it out." His grip was steady, his words sure, and for the first time since waking up, I felt some of my anxiety ease. Maybe he was right, maybe we could figure this out. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were too many things at stake, too many ways this could go wrong. But as I looked at him, his determination clear, I realized that I didn't want to walk away. Not from this. Not from him. "Okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "One step at a time." He smiled, that same warm smile that made everything else seem less important. One step at a time. We stayed like that for a few more moments, just holding on to each other, before reality finally pulled us apart. I needed to get home, to shower, change, and try to piece myself back together before heading into work. Alex walked me to the door, his hand lingering on the small of my back, as I stepped out into the hallway. "See you at the office," he said with a wink, and I couldn't help but smile, despite the nervousness still churning in my stomach. "Yeah, see you there," I replied, my voice steady, even though my mind was anything but. As I walked out of his building and into the morning light, I knew things were about to get complicated, but I also knew that I wasn't ready to let go of whatever this was not yet. Not when it felt like I'd just found something I didn't even know I was looking for. The day at the office started like any other, but everything felt different. I walked in, trying to act normal, but every time I passed Alex's office, my stomach did a flip. The memory of his hands on me, his lips, the way he'd looked at me that morning, it was all too fresh, too vivid. I settled into my desk, forcing myself to focus on the tasks at hand. The familiar hum of the office, the clicking keyboards, the distant murmur of voices, it should have grounded me, but all I could think about was the night before. How were we supposed to pretend nothing had changed? Just as I managed to lose myself in work, my phone buzzed. I glanced down, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Alex's name on the screen. Alex, morning meeting in 10. Don't be late. Simple, professional, but I couldn't help but wonder if there was a double meaning. I quickly typed back a response. Jake, I'll be there. The minutes ticked by too quickly, and before I knew it, I was standing outside the conference room, trying to steady my breath. I walked in, keeping my head down, trying to act like everything was normal. But the second I looked up, our eyes met across the room, and I felt that familiar jolt. Alex was already seated, flipping through some papers like he didn't have a care in the world. He gave me a small nod, acknowledging me, and I forced myself to nod back, taking a seat at the far end of the table. The meeting started, and I did my best to focus on the discussion, but it was impossible to ignore the tension crackling between us. Every time Alex spoke, I found myself hanging on his words, even when they were just about sales projections or marketing strategies. It was maddening. About halfway through the meeting, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching, then discreetly checked it under the table. Alex, you look good today, but I prefer how you looked last night. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly locked the screen, feeling the heat rush to my face. I glanced up at Alex, but he was cool as ever, his attention focused on the presentation. I couldn't believe he'd texted me something like that in the middle of a meeting. My mind raced, half with embarrassment, half with excitement. As the meeting dragged on, I couldn't concentrate. The words were just background noise, my thoughts dominated by that text by Alex. I stole a glance at him, trying to gauge his expression, but he was all business calm, composed, completely in control. Meanwhile, I was a mess, barely holding it together. Finally, the meeting wrapped up, and people started filing out of the room. I gathered my things, trying to slip out unnoticed, but Alex's voice stopped me in my tracks. Jake, can you stay for a moment? The casualness in his tone did nothing to calm my nerves. I nodded, my heart pounding as I watched the last of my colleagues leave. Once the door clicked shut, the room seemed to shrink, the silence pressing in on me. Alex didn't say anything at first, just watched me with that unreadable expression. Then, finally, he stood up, slowly walking around the table toward me. How's your day going? It was a simple question, but the way he said it made it clear he wasn't asking about work. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. It's going. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from him. Last night was something, wasn't it? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mind flashed back to everything that had happened, the intensity, the connection, and my pulse quickened. He reached out, brushing a stray piece of lint off my shoulder, his touch lingering just a bit too long. We'll have to be careful, he said, his voice low, but I don't regret it. His words sent a wave of relief through me, but also a fresh surge of nerves. Neither do I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Alex's eyes softened, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me right there, but instead he just nodded. Good. Now, get back to work before people start asking questions. It was a command, but there was a softness to it, an unspoken promise that this wasn't the end, just the beginning. I nodded again, turned on my heel, and walked out of the room, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. As I headed back to my desk, I couldn't help but smile. This was going to be more complicated than I'd imagined, but I was all in. The days after our meeting passed in a blur of routine and stolen glances. I tried to keep my head down, focus on work, and maintain the facade of normalcy, but the thrill of what was happening between Alex and me was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. It was Friday afternoon, and the office was buzzing with the usual end-of-week energy. I was at my desk, going through some last-minute edits on a project, when my phone buzzed. A quick glance told me it was Alex, and my heart skipped a beat. Alex, got plans tonight? I bit my lip, glancing around to make sure no one was watching before typing back. Jake, not yet. Why, do you have something in mind? His response was almost immediate. Alex, meet me at the same bar as last time. 7 p.m. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. I quickly typed back my agreement, trying to ignore the rush of excitement coursing through me, but as the clock ticked closer to 7, My nerves started to kick in. What if someone from the office saw us? What if things got out of hand? I shook off the doubts, reminding myself that we were being careful. Besides, the bar was a bit out of the way, not the kind of place anyone from work would randomly pop into. Still, the knot of anxiety in my stomach refused to fully go away. When I arrived at the bar, Alex was already there, sitting at a secluded table in the back. He looked up as I walked in, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth when our eyes met. The tension from earlier melted away, replaced by a rush of warmth. "Hey," I greeted him as I sat down, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey yourself," he replied, his eyes glinting with that familiar intensity. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, echoing his words from our first night here. It felt like a lifetime ago. We ordered drinks, and the conversation flowed easily, just like before. But underneath the casual talk, there was an undercurrent of something else, something that buzzed with anticipation. Every time his hand brushed against mine, every time our knees touched under the table, the tension built, making it harder to focus on anything but him. Halfway through the evening, just as I was starting to relax, the door to the bar swung open, and a group of people walked in, laughing loudly. My stomach dropped when I recognized a couple of them from work. They didn't notice us at first, too caught up in their own conversation, but panic flared in my chest. "Shit," I muttered under my breath, leaning in closer to Alex. Some people from the office just walked in. Alex's expression didn't change, but I saw the way his eyes narrowed slightly, assessing the situation. "Stay calm," he said, his voice low and steady. "We're just two colleagues having a drink. Nothing unusual about that." I nodded, trying to follow his lead, but my nerves were shot. I could feel the sweat starting to gather at the back of my neck. I forced myself to take a deep breath, focusing on Alex's calm demeanor. He was right. There was no reason to panic. We hadn't done anything wrong, at least, not yet. But then, one of our coworkers, Tim, glanced our way, his eyes widening in recognition. He nudged the person next to him, and suddenly the whole group was looking at us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I forced a smile, giving them a small wave. Tim waved back, a curious look on his face, and then started making his way over to our table. "Jake, Alex, didn't expect to see you two here." I scrambled for a response, my mind blanking under the pressure. "Yeah, just catching up on some work stuff," I said, trying to sound casual. Alex, ever the professional, didn't miss a beat. "We were discussing the upcoming project," he said smoothly, flashing one of his easygoing smiles. "But I think we've wrapped it up for now." Tim nodded, still looking a bit curious, but thankfully didn't press the issue. "Well, don't let us interrupt," he said, though he didn't move to leave. Instead, he lingered, his eyes flicking between us, as if trying to piece together what exactly was going on. Alex handled it like a pro, steering the conversation back to work-related topics, but I could feel the tension in the air. I tried to contribute, but my mind was racing, worrying about what Tim might be thinking, what rumors might start if he said anything to the others. Eventually, Tim and the others moved to the bar, leaving us alone again, but the atmosphere had changed. The easygoing vibe from earlier was gone, replaced by a heaviness that settled in my chest. "That was close," I muttered, taking a long sip of my drink to steady my nerves. Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We'll need to be more careful," he said, his voice low, "but I think we managed to diffuse that pretty well." I wasn't so sure, but I nodded anyway. "Yeah, I guess." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine briefly, a small gesture meant to reassure. "This doesn't change anything, Jake. We'll figure it out." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt was still there, gnawing at the edges of my mind. "I know," I said quietly, but I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. We finished our drinks, the conversation more subdued now, and when we finally left the bar, the night air felt cooler, sharper, against my skin. Alex walked me to my car, his hand lingering on my arm as we said goodbye. "We'll talk soon," he said, his voice soft, but the command in it was clear. "Yeah," I agreed, trying to muster a smile. "See you Monday?" As I drove home, my thoughts were a jumble of excitement and anxiety. Tonight had been a wake-up call. We were playing with fire, and sooner or later, someone was going to get burned. But despite the risk, I couldn't bring myself to walk away, not yet. Monday morning arrived with a heavy sense of dread hanging over me. I walked into the office, my mind still replaying the events from Friday night. The close call with Tim and the others had left me on edge all weekend, and now, stepping into the familiar hum of the workplace, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone knew everyone was watching. I made my way to my desk, trying to focus on the day's tasks, but every time someone passed by, I felt my pulse quicken, half expecting them to stop and ask me about Friday. My nerves were frayed, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. By mid-morning, I was no closer to calming down. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, hoping to just get through the day without any incidents. But then, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from Alex. Subject: can you come by my office? My stomach tightened. I knew this was coming. We needed to talk about what happened, but that didn't make it any easier. I glanced around the office, making sure no one was paying attention, then quickly typed back. Jake, on my way. I stood up, trying to steady my nerves as I made the short walk to Alex's office. I knocked lightly before pushing the door open, stepping inside. Alex was sitting at his desk, his expression unreadable as he looked up from his computer. Close the door, he said, his tone calm but serious. I did as he asked, then moved to stand in front of his desk, my hands shoved into my pockets to keep them from trembling. You wanted to see me. He nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of him. Sit down, Jake. We need to talk. I sank into the chair, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming next. Alex leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying me closely. How are you holding up? The question caught me off guard. I had expected him to jump straight into damage control mode, not ask about my well-being. I'm okay, I guess I replied, though the uncertainty in my voice was obvious. He nodded slowly, as if considering his next words carefully. Friday was a close call. We need to be more careful moving forward. I don't want this to affect your work or ours. I swallowed hard, nodding. I know. I've been thinking about it all weekend. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. Alex's expression softened slightly, a hint of concern in his eyes. I don't either. That's why we need to be smart about this. He paused, then added, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to walk on eggshells around here. That's easier said than done, I admitted, letting out a nervous laugh. Every time someone looks at me, I feel like they know. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get it, Jake, but I need you to stay focused, keep doing your job like you always have. If we start acting differently, people will notice. And that's the last thing we want. He was right, of course. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. What about Tim? I asked, my voice quieter now. Do you think he suspects anything? Alex shook his head. I don't think so. He didn't say anything to me this morning, and if he had suspicions, I'm sure he would have mentioned it by now. But we'll keep an eye on him, just in case. His confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't help the knot of anxiety that still lingered in my chest. Okay, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I'll try to relax. Alex's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something more, something personal. But then he seemed to catch himself, his expression shifting back to its usual composed mask. Good, he said, his tone back to business. We'll get through this. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I took the hint and rose from my chair, but just as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Jake, he said, and when I looked back at him, there was something in his eyes, something that made my heart skip a beat. This is going to be complicated, but I don't regret it, and I don't want you to either. I hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. I said quietly, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't regret a single moment. He nodded, satisfied, and the tension between us seemed to ease, just a little. I'll see you later, he said, and this time there was a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. Yeah, I replied, my voice steady now. See you later. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anxiety, and something else I couldn't quite name. The pressure was mounting, and I knew things were only going to get more complicated from here. But there was no turning back now. I was in too deep. The following week, things seemed to settle into a precarious rhythm. I kept my head down, focused on my work, and avoided any situation that might draw unwanted attention. Alex and I still exchanged glances, brief touches when no one was looking, but we were both careful, too careful, maybe. The tension of keeping everything under wraps was starting to wear on me. By Thursday, the pressure was starting to get to me. I was exhausted from the constant vigilance, the pretending, and the gnawing anxiety that someone might figure us out. So when Alex called me into his office that afternoon, I wasn't in the best headspace. "Jake, close the door," he said as I walked in, his tone clipped. I did as he asked, noting the tension in his voice. Something was off. "What's up?" I asked, trying to keep things casual, but I could feel the unease creeping in. Alex didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed me a report, one I recognized from a project I'd been working on all week. "Do you see the problem here?" I took the report, scanning the pages quickly. My stomach dropped as I saw what he was talking about. There was a significant error in the data. I must have missed it in my rush to meet the deadline. I didn't catch that, I stammered, feeling the blood drain from my face. "I know," he said, his voice flat. "And it's not like you to miss something like this, Jake. What's going on?" The disappointment in his tone cut deeper than I expected. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I'll fix it right away. I've been a little distracted lately." Alex sighed, rubbing his temples as he leaned back in his chair. "Look, I get that things have been stressful, but this is important. If this had gone out like this, it would have caused a lot of problems, not just for you, but for the entire team." The gravity of the situation hit me hard. I'd let my guard down, let the stress and tension get to me, and now it was affecting my work. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It won't happen again." He studied me for a moment, his gaze softer now, but there was still an edge to it. "Jake, I need you to be fully present. I can't afford to have you slipping up, especially not now." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily on my shoulders. "I'll make sure it's right." For a moment it looked like he wanted to say more, something personal, but he held back, his expression unreadable. "Good. And Jake, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you need to tell me. We can't afford to have this get out of hand." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew he wasn't just talking about the work. The unspoken part of the conversation hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "I will," I promised, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. Alex nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer before he turned his attention back to his computer. "All right, get it fixed and let me know when it's done." I hesitated, feeling the need to say something more, to address the tension that was growing between us, but the words wouldn't come. So I just nodded, mumbling, "I'll take care of it," before turning and leaving his office. Back at my desk, I stared at the report, the error glaring up at me like a neon sign. I should have caught it, should have been more careful, but all I could think about was how this mess was just a symptom of a larger problem, one I wasn't sure how to fix. The rest of the afternoon was a blur as I threw myself into correcting the mistake, trying to push everything else out of my mind. But the conversation with Alex kept replaying in my head, his disappointment, the underlying tension between us. It was like a knot I couldn't untangle, no matter how hard I tried. By the time I finished fixing the report, it was late. The office was quiet, most people had already gone home. I sent the corrected version to Alex, then leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the desk, and I glanced at it, half expecting it to be Alex. But it was just a reminder about a dinner I'd scheduled with a friend I hadn't seen in weeks, because I'd been too wrapped up in work and Alex. I sighed, knowing I should go, knowing I needed a break, but the last thing I wanted to do was pretend everything was fine when it was far from it. I sent a quick text to cancel, then gathered my things and left the office, the weight of the day pressing down on me. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to unravel, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next few days were a test of endurance. I buried myself in work, double-checking every detail, trying to make up for the mistake I'd made. But no matter how hard I worked, the tension between Alex and me lingered, unspoken but ever present. By Thursday, I was running on fumes. I hadn't slept much, too busy trying to keep everything from falling apart at work, with Alex, in my own mind. The pressure was suffocating, and I could feel myself nearing the edge, but I kept pushing, pretending everything was fine. That afternoon, as I was finishing up yet another project, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. "Alex, can you come to my office?" The words were innocuous enough, but something about them set me on edge. I hesitated, staring at the screen, before finally typing back. Jake, on my way. I stood up, feeling a sense of dread settle in my stomach as I walked to his office. The last conversation we'd had was still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this one was going to be worse. When I entered, Alex was pacing behind his desk, his expression tight. He didn't greet me, didn't even look up at first, just kept moving, his tension palpable. "Close the door," he said, his voice clipped. I did as he asked, my anxiety ratcheting up another notch. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stopped pacing and finally looked at me, his eyes hard. "We need to talk." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I braced myself, waiting for the blow. "I've noticed a change in your work lately, Jake," he began, his tone cool and controlled. "You're distracted, making mistakes you wouldn't normally make. It's not just the report from last week, it's been happening more and more." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Let me finish. I know things between us have gotten complicated, and I'm partly to blame for that. But it's affecting your performance, and that can't happen." His words hit like a punch to the gut. I felt my defenses crumbling, but I tried to hold them together. "I know I've been off lately, but I'm trying to fix it. I'm doing my best." "I know you are," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, but the tension remained. "But trying isn't enough. I need to know that you can handle this, both the job and whatever this is between us." I swallowed hard, feeling the pressure mounting. "I can handle it, Alex. I just need a little more time." He shook his head, a flicker of frustration crossing his features. "Time isn't the issue, Jake. The issue is that you're burning out, and it's affecting everything. If we don't get a handle on this now, it's only going to get worse." I could feel my heart racing, my breath coming faster. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of his expectations, the pressure of keeping everything under control. It was all too much. "I'm fine," I said, but the words came out too quickly, too defensive. "I can manage." Alex sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Jake, I care about you. That's why I'm saying this. We need to figure out a way to make this work without it destroying you or us." His concern, instead of calming me, only made the tension worse. "I don't need you to fix me, Alex," I snapped, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I just need you to trust that I can handle it." He looked taken aback, but the shock quickly turned to anger. "This isn't just about trust, Jake. It's about being realistic. We're in a high-stress environment, and if you can't keep it together, we're both going to pay the price." The argument was spiraling out of control, and I knew it, but I couldn't stop. The frustration, the exhaustion, the fear, it all came crashing down at once. Maybe this was a mistake, I blurted out, the words like a knife twisting in my gut even as I said them. Maybe we shouldn't have started this in the first place. Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. Alex stared at me, his expression hardening into something unreadable. "Is that really what you think?" he asked, his voice cold. I didn't know how to answer. The truth was, I didn't know what I thought anymore. I was too tired, too overwhelmed, to see a way out. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He turned away, his shoulders tense. "If that's how you feel, maybe we need to take a step back. Figure out what we really want from this, if it's worth the risk." The finality in his tone sent a jolt of panic through me, but I was too exhausted to fight it. "Maybe," I muttered, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Alex didn't say anything else, and I took that as my cue to leave. I turned and walked out of his office, the door closing behind me with a soft click that felt like the end of something important. As I made my way back to my desk, my mind was a storm of emotions: anger, regret, fear. I knew I'd crossed a line, said things I didn't really mean, but it was too late to take them back. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions, barely aware of what I was doing. The conversation with Alex replayed in my mind over and over, each time leaving me more drained, more lost. By the time I left the office that evening, I felt like I was walking in a daze. I didn't know what to do, where to go, how to fix what had happened. All I knew was that something had broken, and I wasn't sure if it could be put back together. The weekend passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless overthinking. I replayed the conversation with Alex so many times in my head that it felt like a broken record. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake, but I was too proud or maybe too scared to reach out to him first. By Monday morning, I was a wreck. I dragged myself into the office, dreading the inevitable encounter with Alex. The usual hum of activity surrounded me, but it felt like I was moving through molasses, every step heavy with the weight of unresolved tension. I dropped my bag at my desk, trying to focus on the work in front of me, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Alex. What was he thinking? Did he regret everything? Did he regret everything? Did he want to end it for good? The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I knew I couldn't go on like this. A few hours into the morning, just as I was drowning in the what-ifs, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from Alex. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. "Alex, we need to talk. Can you meet me in my office at noon?" There it was, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Was this it? The end of whatever we had? Or was there still a chance to salvage it? I typed back a quick response, confirming the time, then sat back in my chair, trying to steady my nerves. The next few hours crawled by, each minute a reminder of the confrontation that was looming. By the time noon rolled around, I felt like I was on the verge of a breakdown. I stood outside Alex's office, my hand hovering over the door handle, trying to summon the courage to go in. Finally, I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Alex was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," he said, and I did, the sound of it shutting behind me feeling like a finality I wasn't ready to face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The tension was thick, almost suffocating, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said last week," he began, his voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place, about whether this was a mistake. I swallowed hard, trying to read his expression, but he was a closed book. And I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think it was a mistake, Jake, but I do think we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're doing here, what we want." The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the seriousness in his tone. "What do you want, Alex?" I asked, forcing myself to look him in the eye. He held my gaze, his expression softening just a fraction. "I want this to work," he said quietly, "but not at the cost of everything else. Not if it's going to tear us apart." His words hit me hard, the truth of them sinking in. I nodded slowly, understanding what he was saying. "I don't want that either," I admitted, "but I don't know how to do this without losing us." Alex took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "Then we have to make a choice, Jake. We can keep trying to balance everything, to keep this a secret and pretend nothing's changed. Or we can face it head on, figure out what this really means for us, and decide if it's worth the risk." The weight of his words settled heavily on my shoulders. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything going forward. I could feel the fear rising in my chest, the fear of making the wrong decision, of losing him, of losing myself. But I knew he was right. We couldn't keep going like this, half in and half out. It was time to decide what we really wanted. I took a deep breath, gathering the courage I'd been lacking for days. "I want this, Alex, I want you. But I can't do it like this, hiding, pretending it doesn't matter. If we're going to make this work, we have to be all in. No more half measures." His eyes softened, and I saw a flicker of something, hope, maybe cross his face. "I want that too," he said, his voice low but firm. "All in." The tension between us seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by a quiet understanding. We were both scared, both uncertain, but we were willing to take the risk together. Alex closed the distance between us, his hand finding mine. "We'll figure it out, Jake," he said, his voice gentle. "But we have to do it together. No more running, no more hiding." I nodded, squeezing his hand, feeling a sense of calm settle over me for the first time in days. Together, I echoed. We stood there for a moment, just holding on to each other, the weight of the decision sinking in. It wasn't going to be easy, none of this was, but it felt right. Like we were finally on the same page, ready to face whatever came next. As we pulled apart, Alex gave me a small, genuine smile, one that made my heart skip a beat. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said, and I knew he meant it. "One step at a time," I agreed, feeling a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. We walked out of his office together, side by side, ready to face the challenges ahead. It wasn't the end, far from it. But it was a new beginning, one that we were both ready for.